Hello, Garland Nixon here with Scott Ritter Thursday morning. And I think if we try hard, we may be able to find something to talk about. Let's talk. Hello, Garland Nixon here with Scott Ritter, and we got some big stuff to talk about. Istanbul, Scott, and I'm going to connect this to some work that Scott did earlier called Agent Zelensky, where he talked about Zelensky's, shall we say, MI6 puppetry. But before we get into that, so stay tuned. Big stuff going on in this show. But before that, Scott. ScottRitter.com is your website. I know you've got the Russia House. I know you got a new book out. Let's update people with what's happening with the Russia House, how they can find out about it, and of course your new book.
Well, the Russia House is a project that's been going on for a little more than 2 months now. It's a continuation of a project that I had begun a couple years ago together with Solo of Live called the Scott Ritter Show, basically to interview critical Russian voices and bring their point of view to an American audience. That got shut down when the FBI raided my house, and the United States government pretty much declared a ban on any collaboration with Russian media. So what I did is I set up my own thing. It's a Telegram channel. It's administered by a Russian in Russia, but there's no financial connectivity between myself and this channel. It is a subscription-based channel because you can't do something of this nature unless you can afford to pay for interpreters and things of that nature. The production values are quite high, and compensate the producer as well. So it's subscription-based, but you get knockout interviews. I mean, I've interviewed Maria Zakharova. I've interviewed Oleg Artemyov, a cosmonaut, Abdi Aludanov. I've interviewed historians, politicians, academicians, and everybody in between. And so, that's that project that's ongoing. We just have a new article and a new posting coming out this week. We have some exciting interviews coming up, potentially the new Russian ambassador to the United States to talk about the future of U.S.-Russian relations. Within that context, I'll bring up my new book, Highway to Hell. It's out by Clarity Press, the Armageddon Chronicles, 2015-2024. It basically covers, my reporting on the issue of nuclear weapons, America's nuclear policy, arms control policy, etc. I view it as the third book in a trilogy of books on nuclear issues that I've put out over the course of the past few years. The first one being Scorpion King, A History of America's Addiction to Nuclear Weapons. The second one was Perestroika in the time of disarmament in the time of perestroika, sort of a memoir about my time as a weapons inspector in the Soviet Union, getting rid of nuclear weapons back in the late 1980s, early 1990s, and now Highway to Hell. I mean, this book, if you read it, you should become insistent on making arms control our top policy. This goes hand in glove with a new new documentary that I'm working on called 38 Minutes. 38 Minutes refers to the amount of time on January 13th, 2018. The 38 minutes was the amount of time between the initial notification that went over cell phones, etc., in Hawaii, that a ballistic missile armed with a nuclear warhead was inbound. This is not a drill, seek shelter. And for 38 minutes until it was announced this was a false alarm, people thought they were going to die. And what we're trying to do with the documentary is capture the emotions during that time. The question I would have liked to ask people at that moment is, now that you know you're going to die, what would you have done before this to stop that missile from flying? Would you have made it your top priority now that you know you're going to die? The problem is, I think everybody during that 38 minutes would say, "Yeah, that's my number one priority, saving my family, saving my livelihood, saving my life, saving society." Um, but then the 39th minute hit, and that, oh, it's just a drill. It's not just a drill, ladies and gentlemen. Those weapons exist around the world, and one of these days they will come flying at you, and you will be stuck in a situation where you will have to contemplate for a certain period of time your imminent demise. And what I would like you to do right now is project yourself into that 38 minutes and ask yourself, what would I do to prevent that from happening? And that's the purpose of the documentary, and that's hand in glove with these 3 books about the threat of nuclear weapons. And then I have a new project out that's near and dear to my heart called Trump Watch. Basically, it's a weekly podcast. Now it's available on my Substack as a paid subscriber, on my Locals as a paid subscriber, and we hope soon on X. We take an issue dealing with Donald Trump's policies, and we discuss it with relevant experts, and then we provide grades to Trump. The first episode was with Alan Dershowitz. We talked about immigration policy. Trump got a passing grade on that, even though the grade was lower than it would have been because of the constitutionality or the questionable constitutionality of much of what he's doing. But he said he was going to do something, and he's doing it, and that's sort of what we're grading him on. The second episode was about his pick of Secretary of State with Marco Rubio, and we had a fascinating discussion with Larry Wilkerson, former Colonel of the United States military, former Chief of Staff of Colin Powell when Colin Powell was Secretary of State of the United States. So it's not just a critique of the selection of Marco Rubio, but Larry provided some fascinating insights, inside baseball, anecdotal stuff about Colin Powell's tenure as Secretary of State and about the Secretary of State position in general, which is critical background information if you're going to critically assess Marco Rubio as Trump's pick. I won't give away the grade. We'll just say that it's not an honors graduate level. But these are things. I think next week we'll be discussing tariff policy, and we're just going to pick a policy every week and subject it to critical review. It's not an anti-Trump program. It's not a pro-Trump program. It's a critical analysis of Trump's policies, and where Trump succeeds, he'll get credit. Where he fails, we'll call him out.
Excellent. All right. Now let's get started. So anybody, who wants to check out all that stuff as we were talking, I had it up. All you got to do is go, if you're watching this video, just go backwards and freeze it, and you can see it. You can search it. You can find it yourself. Okay, let's get rolling. Here's something that, everybody's talking about the Istanbul talks. Here's something that stood out to me. And that is, and I always go back to this, Scott Ritter did a great project, Agent Zelensky, where he posed that Zelensky is a, shall we say, project of MI6, which I believe exactly the same thing. Absolutely, right? I believe that there was a partition of duties, shall we say, when it comes to Ukraine. Could be wrong. I've posited this for a while. The Brits, MI6, handled the political and intelligence part. The French, their Foreign Legion history and all, they handled the mercenaries part. The U.S. was the muscle, sending in a lot of the, so there was a partition of duties. But this is one of my things I suspect. Any way you look at it, that means that Zelensky's a creation of London. Here's my point, to throw this at you, Scott. One of the things that's interesting is the deputy prime, and this is all over the place. The deputy prime minister said he's sending his assistant as an advisor to Zelensky. That Zelensky shows up there, and of course he's doing Zelensky things, right? All the Russians. What? At first he says this. I love this. Well, I don't know who they're sending, but whoever it is, it's a phony delegation. But I don't know who they are. But of course it's a phony delegation, right? But the Brits quickly say, "Oh, we're sending an advisor to him." An advisor. They're sending, you can't have a puppet without a marionette with somebody above him holding that wooden little X thing, yanking on the strings. Your thoughts on the advisor to Zelensky, and what kind of things do you think that the direction that's going, and what an MI6 advisor would tell their puppet, how he would tell their puppet to dance?
Well, I think we need to understand that during the period of time that Zelensky was recruited as an agent of MI6 in his candidacy for presidency and in the leading moments of his presidency. Zelensky's job was to create conditions in Ukraine that bolstered the position of the United Kingdom, the policies of the United Kingdom. And basically, at that time, the policies were to use Ukraine as a proxy vehicle to generate a conflict that could be used to weaken Vladimir Putin. Politically, militarily, economically, diplomatically, to isolate Russia, to bring down Russia. And, in the 3+ years that have, now 6 years since the election, 3+ years since the conflict, the United Kingdom is facing a completely different reality. And I think it's imperative at this point in time that Zelensky stick to a script that can be supported by his Western masters. Vladimir Putin, on Thursday earlier this week when he announced this this Istanbul gathering, set a trap. It's a very carefully laid trap. And the Russians have made it clear that if diplomacy, as Russia defines it, isn't chosen, then it's over for diplomacy. And this will be resolved militarily, which Russia is ready to do. The West is not. Zelensky needs to keep his mouth shut about certain things. Zelensky needs to be careful not to walk into this trap set by the Russians. And this is why the British now are sending an advisor who is going to be next to Zelensky and approving everything the cocaine addict says. So, and maybe to control his cocaine intake and the fluctuations in mood and temperament that accompany that. But this is a very delicate time, a very crucial time for the United Kingdom, for Europe, for NATO. And Zelensky can't be trusted to do this alone. He's always been a British asset. The problem comes when Zelensky goes off script and actually believes that he's the legitimate president of Ukraine. He's not. He is there to do the bidding of his masters. And right now, Great Britain needs to make sure that he's on the right script.
Yeah, I think you're right. But I think what's interesting, one of the things I brought up was this, the May 9th celebration. I do want to talk about that a little bit, but the fact of the matter was these idiots, the coalition of the sniffing, aside from the looks of the little, the cocaine train, shall we say, situation, thought they had laid the ultimate trap. The Russians are celebrating, hooray, and they had this great celebration, and people are there. The Africans are there. Ibrahim Traore, he's there in his, red beret, looking like a some kind of a special forces guy, and everybody's there. And people are like, yeah, well, the Russians don't look like they're so isolated after all, right? And here comes the plan. We're going to give them an ultimatum. We're going to yank the rug out from out of that. And I put it like, I love to talk about self-defense. It's like a punch. Man, when you throw a punch is when you're vulnerable. A lot of people are counter punchers. They want you because when that arm comes out, you know what I mean? There's a lot of options. You know what I mean? When your arm, there are a lot of people that just wait, right? You throw a punch and then that's when they're going to take you out, right? Because you better not miss. Especially if you throw one of those big winding hooks that they love to throw in the street. Man, if you miss that thing, all of this is there. You know what I mean? All somebody's got to do is push, and it's up here, and they're just going to beat you to death, right? They threw a haymaker, right? May 9th, we're going to get you. We think you're vulnerable. Boom, take this or else. And the Russians just ducked. You know what I mean? They just ducked. Whoop, oops, you missed that one. There you go. And, this was their chance to destroy May 9th and corner the Russians. But I think more so they were going to corner Trump. You know what I mean? Okay, Trump, now the Russians aren't going to take this and you got to join us. And I think the Russians ducked and said, hey, we'll talk to you Thursday. And Trump ducked in a way when he said, look, that's a good idea. I might even be there. So everybody that they were trying to trap, whether it was the Trump administration, and of course, I guarantee you the Rubios and the Kellogg's were part of that plan. Everybody who did that, it ended up backfiring on them. I think. Your thoughts on that whole plot to hit the Russians on May 9th with this and how it dramatically backfired.
Yeah, the problem is I can't give the West too much credit here because it wasn't much of a plot. You know, in order for there to be a plot, you have to have some substance to build upon. And the West has nothing but rhetoric, empty rhetoric. I mean, even as Europe is attempting to posture itself as some sort of player, you have the French talking tough and then turn around and go, "We ain't got nothing left to give you, Zelensky. We're out of equipment." Well, gosh, that's pretty tough posturing. You got the British saying, we don't have any troops either. We got nothing. Poland, you're going to join this, right? You're part of the cocaine train. But trust, like, Poland's not going in there. We're not touching that with a 10-foot pole, you know, and that leaves the Germans. And, you know, Germany can talk tough. I mean, all the language is tough. We're going to have the most powerful military in Europe. Well, how long is that going to take you? It ain't going to happen this week or next week. The big component of that, we have to recondition the German youth to. I'm just telling you right now, the German youth ain't going to be lining up to enlist in your little Nazi army again. You know, they don't even know what it means to be German anymore. That flag on their shoulder, they're not proud of that. They don't know what that means. They're not willing to die for that. And you now want to transform him into the most powerful military in Europe because that's Germany's legacy. Yeah, a legacy that got your ass kicked twice. The second time you should have been eliminated as a nation state, given the crimes that you committed against humanity. But somehow you've forgotten that. So they don't have anything. And the Ukrainians don't have anything. What are they threatening? They're losing across the board. You know, the fact of the matter is, when the Russians break free of the Donetsk final fortifications, there ain't nothing behind it. There's nothing for the Ukrainian army to fall back on. They're frantically digging trenches and, you know, doing things. But when they break free, they're going to have to go to the river, and that's not going to be a good day for Ukraine. You know, so this is why they desperately want this 30-day ceasefire. The 30-day ceasefire saves them. And Russia just isn't going to play that game. Russia needs to, the one person they're worried about here, and they're not worried in the sense of if, you know, it changes anything, but they would like to keep the United States out of the sustaining Ukraine business. They would prefer that the United States walks away. In order to do that, you're going to have to make it look as if Europe and Ukraine are the problem, which they are, but you can't allow it to be spun in a way that makes it look like Russia's the one that doesn't want this. So that was the genius of Vladimir Putin in bringing Istanbul in. And right now you got a Russian delegation sitting there in the hall waiting. The last I checked, you know, Zelensky was flying from Ankara to Istanbul, where he'll issue instructions to the team. I'd like to hear, you know, what Erdogan said to him in those 3 hours. I'd like to believe that Erdogan told him, you know, if you do anything to screw this up, if this ends because, you know, it could be postured as Ukraine's fault, it's over for you. It's over. You literally have to bend over backwards and, you know, make it seem to be the Russians' fault. But in order to do that, you have to engage. And right now, you know, the Ukrainians are going through a remarkable transformation of, you know, it's a sham, it's a joke delegation, or to, we're only going to talk about 30-day ceasefire, to, all right, we're going to figure out what we're going to talk about, but, you know, we'll have to work that one out.
Yeah. Well, look at this. So Russia, here's the thing, knowing that the likelihood is the Ukrainians won't even talk to them, they're being, now, I'm not saying they're ready for compromises. They probably got some little thing ready, but they're saying we're ready for possible compromises. It appears to me that the Russian, shall I say, plan here, knowing what they're dealing with, is to go out of their way to say, we're very, very reasonable. We're willing to talk. We're willing to compromise. You know what I mean? This is a perfect setup for the Russians, in a way, it's the perfect setup for the Russians that the coalition of the willing, the MI6 and company set up for the Russians from the perspective of who's who, of who's the reasonable person and who's the unreasonable person. Let's bring, okay, great, they're all together now. So the Russians are sitting there with a high level group, and the high level group says, we're ready to talk, we're ready to compromise, let's sit down, let's get this done. And the Ukrainians can't. And I'll go further. Man, if Zelensky does that and goes back to Kiev, I don't think he'll be alive. I don't think the neo-Nazis would even accept that. He probably already has the word. You do that, buddy.
Well, I think the key, again, if I were advising the Ukrainians, it would be engage with the Russians, hear the Russians out, start talking about, potential framework, and then say we have to go back for consultations.
Right.
And buy time for a second meeting. That's what a smart negotiator would do. I saw a comment that Malinsky isn't a top negotiator. The person literally doesn't know what they're talking about. He's a very accomplished Russian bureaucrat, a Russian civil servant who has been well briefed. He is the top negotiator.
Who is this?
Because he doesn't, Malinsky, the guy who heads the delegation.
Okay.
And he has a team of people who have out negotiated everybody in the world. These include the people that negotiated the surrender of Azov at Azovstal. All right. These
weren't some of them? They were at Istanbul too, weren't they? The original. Yeah. They were at the original Istanbul.
Yeah. This is a killer team. A killer team. You see, and this is what people who make that kind of statement, they just show their ignorance. I don't mean to pick on them. I know they're your audience, and I'll be respectful. But the fact of the matter is, the negotiating team isn't there to make policy. See, if Lavrov was there, you'd be like, well, that's a serious guy. Lavrov is at the top of the pyramid. Okay, Lavrov is the guy that has consulted with Putin already, along with Ushakov, to determine what the parameters are for Russia's negotiating position. Zelensky's job is to go in there and make it happen. That's his job. His job isn't to sit there and say, well, I'm going to consider that and come back. He's saying this is what we're doing. This is it. This is that. This is it. I got my killers here. We're going to come in, stare you in the eye and tell you what the facts are, what the reality is, what the conditions are. This is the team that closes the deal. All right. This isn't the CEO who sits at a country club sipping cocktails, writing something out on a napkin. This is the hard ass, lawyer who comes in and is closing the deal. All right. That's what this is. This is the best possible team. This is the team that Ukraine's scared of, because this is a killer team, a great team. And this is why the West right now, because if this was just a team that everybody's saying, a sham team, nobody would take it seriously. Everybody's taking this team seriously. Everybody knows this team came in loaded for bear. They're ready to rock. They're ready to make a deal right now, and to include compromises. Russia's not going to have its bluff called. I can guarantee you that if the top negotiator says we're ready to make compromises, they're ready. They know where they want to compromise. They have the team to make it happen. That team has been well briefed. They are ready to discuss the nuts and bolts of the compromises. And this is why Ukraine's in an absolute panic, because once you engage with this team, they're going to own you unless you're prepared. So again, the best thing for the Ukrainians would do to go sit down, begin the process, discuss potential compromises, get the Russians to engage, and then say, wow, this is a lot to think of. We need to take a time out and head back and do some consultation, because this is serious stuff that you guys are talking about. And we're really interested in pursuing this, but we're a little off of this. That's where we're. So I think that this is a trap. The Russians have set a brilliant trap. They're ready. Russia knows the deal that they want. Anybody who says that Russia doesn't want a negotiated end to this conflict doesn't know the Russians, but they're not going to surrender. They have an outcome that is desirable. There are areas that they can tweak because it's a negotiation. But, Russia's not going to agree to a 30-day ceasefire until they have a deal in place that answers all of the questions about how this conflict started and how to prevent the conflict from happening 10 years from now.
Yeah, I'm with you. It's just like somebody going to buy a car, and the salesman saying all of that, and the salesman goes back and says, "Hold on, let me get the sales manager." The sales manager comes out to close the deal, and the sales manager knows how much he can give you.
Yep.
Right. And the salesmen are like, well, the sales manager comes, hey, you want to buy the car? Yeah, tell you what I'll do. It's a used car. Yeah, we'll put new tires on it. And you say, well, will you do this? No, but I can do this. The sales manager just closed the deal, but he knows how far he can go. He knows what his boss, the guy who runs this thing, will do, how far he'll go. And I think that's where we are. The Russians, when they get in there, and they know best possible deal. This is what we want. This is a mid deal. This, you can't go any further than this. This is the minimum you got to get to walk out of there. Anything less than that, you can't take it. So the Russians are in there. They know Zelensky, their side doesn't even have a plan because they don't even want a deal. To them, to me, the Russians are negotiating in good faith, right?
Yeah.
To me, the MI6 puppets et al. Are playing a PR game. How can we get out of here with our skin, with some skin on our back, but we're not negotiating in good faith, and which gives the Russians an extreme advantage.
Yeah, imagine if you're buying a car, because I love the car, so because I just bought one,
Mm-hmm.
And you're coming in for the first time. Well, actually, let's say it's the fourth time. You've come in over the course of every 6 months, and you get them to where they're doing a deal, and then you just walk away and you don't close the deal. I can guarantee you when you meet with the sales manager, you're not getting the best deal. Sales manager's like, nah, this is what we can give you, nothing more. Now imagine you're Scott Ritter, and for the last 6 years, you've come here, you've sat down, had serious conversations, and you closed the deal. You got the car. And I'm in a final negotiation on closing the deal on this car, but I've been upfront and honest about what I can afford, what I can do, what I can't do. And in order to make this deal happen, because I am a loyal customer, because I come back, because I'm a repeat performer, they give me the best deal, not because I'm trying to gain them, but because it's real, because it's real and all that. So they're willing to reduce their profit margin on this sale because they've got me. I've bought in the past. I'm going to come back in the future and do it. Ukraine's not that kind of negotiating partner. They've lied, straight up lied. They bragged about it. A lot of people don't realize that in January and February before this, Russia was in active negotiations with the Ukrainians to avoid this war. And the Ukrainians laughed about it. We led the Russians along by the nose. They actually thought right up until the end that we were serious about avoiding war, but we were just leading them on. And I'm not talking about the sham of the Minsk agreement. I'm talking about after that was exposed, Russia still didn't want to go to war. And then came the whole negotiations leading up to Istanbul communique. And the Russians thought the Ukrainians were serious here. And maybe the negotiating team was serious. But the puppet and his puppet masters weren't. And so now Russia's looking at this. Unless the Ukrainians bring a team that the Russians know and trust and say, okay, for instance, if the Ukrainians reconstituted their team that negotiated in Istanbul, the Russians say, okay, we can talk to you because we've talked to you in the past. We don't blame you for the failure. We understand what the failure points were. But if they're bringing in the team of people that led to the failure, that supported the withdrawal from the Istanbul communique, that never supported the Istanbul communique to begin with, they're not going to give them the good deal. They're not going to put that on the table because it's not serious. Once you put something on the table, and you know this from a car dealership, we'll throw in the zircon covering. Well, I got you now. The zircon covering is going to be on that car, because you already said it's going to be. Russia's not going to throw the good compromises out there on the table for that team. Russia's going to hold on to those until they get the serious closers. So I think the Russians are in control of this process. Again, the only thing, I just go back to the old OODA loop theory, get inside the decision-making cycle. I'm not saying it would throw the Russians for a loop because I think the Russians are very well prepared, but I do think that if the Ukrainians engaged seriously and had a very serious conversation and went beyond 30-day ceasefire and then called a timeout to go back and consult, that they now are inside the decision-making cycle of the Russians. And that makes it a more interesting negotiation at that standpoint in time, because now the Russians have committed. The sales manager has put the zircon covering of the car on the table, and you can't walk that one away because you were willing to do that. That was part of your deal. We're going to do so. But I don't think the Ukrainians are that clever. I think that's what the British advisor is there to make, because the British, as much as I like to pick on them, they are very clever people. They're dishonest as the day is long, but they're very clever when it comes to playing tricks like this. They're very experienced at, taking a weak position and strengthening it through lies and deception. And, I think that's what this advisor is here to do, is help guide Zelensky into a more fruitful negotiation, so he doesn't fumble it from the start. But we'll see. I mean, the Russians aren't going to wait forever, and they're not going to be led by the nose forever either. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I think that's it. He doesn't want his guy to get knocked out today. He wants to. It's like you said. They can stay in the fight, but the Ukrainians could stay in the fight. They could. Okay, that looks good. Well, we'll read this. We'll go back and talk about it, and we'll talk again in another month. Whatever, right? They can stay in the fight. I think that's their best. Their best move. But as you said, the Ukrainian / MI6 are neither clever nor rational. And let's move that. And this takes us to something. Part of the dynamic that's set up by the Russian hating, coalition of the willing is the Russians are mad, crazy savages. You can't deal with them. They just want to attack and kill us all. You know what I mean? And how can you negotiate with them? They'll just pull out knives and jump across the table and try to, slash us. They're madmen and savages. We went to the embassy. I don't maybe not. I know Scott and I went to the embassy to the May 9th celebration, and I was there. I tell you what I saw, Scott. I saw kids perform Russian dances, and they were smiling and they were happy and they were vibrant and they were good-looking kids and they were dancing and they were so proud of their history, right? They were proud. These are dances that Russians have been doing for hundreds, if not, hundreds and hundreds of years. And these kids are doing this dance, right? You see, the men were tough and manly and had good haircuts and proud and stood upright. The women were beautiful and they were, you know what I mean? You just looked and it's like, that's what a beautiful culture. The people were so proud of, they sang their victory songs. They all knew the words and they all clapped along with the kids dancing. And you saw, we're told, the Russians are a bunch of madmen, savages, crazy people. They were beautiful people. They were proud of their heritage. They were knowledgeable of their culture and proud of their culture. And they were proud of their accomplishments and the sacrifices that have been made. And you looked at it and you said, that's a people. You can say what you want. You ain't breaking those people. You know what I mean? That pride in their culture, that's 1,000-year-old pride. You're not going to go in there and intimidate them. You're not going to humiliate them. You're not going to break them. That anybody that goes there and sees, they had their food, all kind of Russian food. Oh, it was great food. And they were proud. And they're talking to us, the people that obviously weren't Russian, asking us questions, saying things, thanking us for our work, things of that nature. It was an interesting, and really, I was proud to be there. Scott, your thoughts?
Well, first of all, besides apologizing to you for being hijacked, I got kidnapped by the Russian defense attaché officers, and we ended up just doing stupid military stuff all night.
Look, everybody was having a blast, man. I was shoving my face full of Russian food.
Yeah. I wish I had a chance to eat the Russian. I filled up my plate, and then I got dragged over where I had to do an endless series of toasts without the benefit of food in my stomach. It was a tough night, but it was a great night. I agree. It's funny because a lot of people, especially people of my generation who grew up during the Cold War, we're trapped in our thinking. When we look at a Russian today, what we see is a repurposed Soviet. We go, well, they're just the Soviets. They call themselves Russians today, but they're really the Soviets. And that just shows an ignorance that is beyond belief. You talked about those dancers. Why were they so proud if they were just repurposed Soviets? You go in and in the 19th century, in the mid 19th century, 1840s, Russian literature began to explode on the scene, and with the Russian literature, you started having Russian intellectuals begin to define what it meant to be Russian. People like Dostoevsky, Gogol, Chekhov, Tolstoy. Um, and one of the philosophies that emerge, or the concepts, is the notion of the Russian soul. What it meant to be a Russian. And it's a very complex thing. Even the Russians can't put their finger exactly on it, but they speak of the Russian soul because this is metaphysical reality of the complexity of the Russians, the beauty of the Russians. But it's a liberating thing. I mean, this is one of the things, people tend to view it dark, because Dostoevsky, the Russian soul had sort of a darkness attached to it, Gogol. But Tolstoy freed it. It was about the liberation of being a Russian, because the Russians could appreciate, a Russian song and nature, and despite everything that happens to them, feel free because they're Russian. And it sort of grew into prominence right about the time the First World War came around and the revolution. Then following the revolution, and then the Civil War, and then the time of the Soviets, the Russian soul sort of died, flitted away, and it was replaced by something called a Homo Sovieticus, the new Soviet man. None of that soul business, none of that Russian orthodoxy business, none of that, just the new Soviet man, which accomplished a lot. I mean, industrialization under Stalin, the new Soviet man, winning World War II, the new Soviet man, going into space first, the new Soviet man. I mean, it's not like they were losers, but it wasn't Russia. Russia always struggled underneath this. That's something we in the West weren't picking up on. In December 1941, when the Germans were at the gate of Moscow, Stalin took one of the most sacred icons in the Russian Orthodox faith. It's the Our Lady of Kazan, I think it is the name of the icon. And he put it on an airplane and had the airplane fly around the Russian front, blessing the soldiers below. Blessing them. These are communists. They're getting blessed by that, because even Stalin understood that in the heart of every Russian was Mother Russia, and Mother Russia is grounded to the faith. And so the Soviet Union collapses, and you have a period of time in the 90s where Russians forgot to be Russians. They weren't proud of who they were. Many Russians were looking to the West to define who they were, or to forget who they were, and to say, we want to be like these people. We want to be this. Meanwhile, the West, instead of being smart and receiving them, we just oppressed them, put our feet on their head, tried to crush them, tried to break them up. And it was a very, very difficult decade. Someday, I hope somebody writes the definitive book about it. If they don't, maybe that'll be the last book I ever write. But it needs to be captured, because you need to understand the decade of the 90s to understand where Russia is today and why those kids were dancing. In 1999, when Vladimir Putin took over as president on New Year's Eve, Russia was a defeated nation, a broken nation. It had so many problems. And in 25 years, Vladimir Putin has turned that country around. How did he do it? This is a Soviet man. This was, Homo Sovieticus personified, a KGB officer, 16 years. And yet he has turned Russia into a nation defined by its faith. It's an Orthodox nation, its culture, its history. Russians are proud to be Russians. In 25 years, they went from a nation that was seeking Western, getting the approval of the West, to a nation that says, we are Russia. We are Russians. And that's what I saw there. But if we don't understand that trajectory, and how Russia relearned to love Russia, and the rebirth of the Russian soul. Today, Russia is defined by the same Russian soul that defined the Russia of Leo Tolstoy. The same love, the same, liberation. The Russians are very much a liberated people today. And we saw that at the Russian embassy, the pride that these people have in being Russian. There's no apologies. There's no, yeah, well, we're Russian. No, it was, yeah, we're Russian.
Exactly.
And if you don't like it, lump it. We don't care. We're Russian. We're proud of who we are. Thank you for coming. Never once did I hear a guy put down the United States in that entire event. Never.
No.
If ever was a time when Russia had a right to be critical of America for all the crap we put on them, now's the time. Never once did I have someone go, "Well, you guys suck," or "Hey, I live in we're in Washington D.C. I was on your metro the other day and I saw this, that, and the other thing. You've got entire areas of DC that are downtrodden, drug-ridden, this, that." Not any of that. Unlike in America, if you get Americans meeting Russians, well, I was on the Moscow subway. Well, I really can't say anything bad about the Moscow subway, but coming down the stairs, I saw a building across the street that had a little bit of graffiti written on it. Well, come back in a week. It'll be painted over because the Russians give a damn about this sort of thing. But Americans don't hesitate. My wife, who's Georgian, but Soviet Georgian, she worked in Vodkinsk in 1988. She came there as an interpreter when the first team of Americans came in. And she saw sides of us that I wasn't aware of because, I'm blissfully ignorant of everything. But Americans would go into Vodkinsk and have conversations with their Soviet counterparts. And every conversation I had was about the history of the region, the culture of the region. Where'd you come from? What school did you go to? What did you study? I just wanted to learn everything. She said there were people come in, they say, well, why is there dirt on the road? Why, you guys don't have, American style pasteurized milk. I mean, we go to the store and it's raw milk, and why are we drinking raw milk? And your stores aren't stocked like ours. You don't have the choices that we have. And, this, that, and the Soviets are all like, why are you doing this?
Right.
What is the purpose of this conversation? Americans have a tendency to put other people down. And we try to promote ourselves at the expense of others. Here we have a situation where the Russians probably, for the first time in a long time, could be putting us down from a position of superiority on certain areas, and they didn't do it. They're gracious, which tells me they love who they are. See, I think Americans are fighting. The reason why we attack other people is that we're sort of secretly uncomfortable about who we are, that we realize there's some blemishes here, that we have some issues. And so rather than be honest and talk about it, we attack others, put them down to build ourselves up. The Russians aren't doing that. The Russians accept us for who we are. There's problems. If we want to talk about that, there's a time and place, but not on Victory Day. The Russians treated us as allies. Did you feel as an ally?
Oh, absolutely.
I was an ally. They treated us as an ally, as a friend. I just walked out of that. I mean, I walked out of it a little drunker than I wanted to be, but I walked out of the Victory Day celebration. My heart was full of joy, happiness. It was a great event, surrounded by great people. And it was a joint victory. That's the other thing. They just made it the whole time. It was about, yes, the glory of the Red Army. Yes, defeating Nazi Germany. Yes, they never shy away from their victories, but never once do they say, well, America didn't do anything. You didn't hear any of the crap we get out of our president right now. Even the embarrassment of standing in front of American troops saying, if it weren't for us, they'd all be speaking German and Japanese too. Hey, Donald, do you know why we dropped 2 atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki? One was we were trying to intimidate the Russians because we knew they were better than us militarily in Europe, so we were a little nervous about that. 2, we didn't want to lose 100,000 men going across the beach in Honshu. We weren't ready for that fight. The American people had given up on the war. Have you ever watched that movie, Flags of Our Father?
No.
It's about the Iwo Jima flag raising and the Marines that 2 Marines and a Navy corpsman were picked to go around and do war bonds. And the Secretary of the Navy and Secretary of Defense meets with them. And, one of the guys wants to get back to the front line. He said, you don't get it. The American people have given up on this war. It's over. Germany surrendered. They want everybody to come home. Nobody wants to continue to fight the Japanese. We're not raising any money. We're not getting any money. This war, is running out of money. We need you to go out and sell this war to the American people because they're done. Now they're done. What? 300,000 dead on both fronts. They're done. Nobody fought on our soil. Not a single American city was razed to the ground. We didn't have to relocate any factories. We didn't have to do any of that. And we're done. We're going to quit. Donald Trump really needs to just shut up about this and be gracious and say this was a great victory for the Red Army. The world owes them a huge debt. They gutted the German army, and they made victory possible. That's all you need to say. You don't need to, you can say the Americans did great things. As I've said before, I will never denigrate the courage of anybody who wore the uniform. I couldn't imagine what it would have been like to be in a landing craft going across the beach in Normandy. You can sit there and talk about the gutting of the German army all you want, but when German machine gun bullets are hitting you as you come out that, you don't care. All you know is you're getting killed. Your friends are getting killed. You got to go up that beach. That's courage. The hedgehog fighting, some of the bloodiest fighting imaginable. Close quarters. The German paratroopers were tough son of a bitches. Battle of the Bulge, tough. The final month liberating Germany, the Battle of Aachen, Hürtgen Forest. Man, we fought hard. Then no one's going to pretend otherwise. And everybody who fought deserves courage, credit for their courage. No one's denigrating Americans. In fact, just promote them all you want. Talk about their heroism. But with the same integrity, talk about the heroism of the Russians and acknowledge that by the time we went across the beach at Normandy on June 6th, the Russians had already stood up at the gates of Moscow, withstood siege at Leningrad, won a great victory at Stalingrad, won an even bigger victory at Kursk. That in the months leading up to our invasion, the Russians launched the Carpathian Offensive. They caused the Germans to withdraw 6 to 7 divisions from the Normandy front and send them in to be destroyed by the Russians. 6 to 7 divisions, which had they been there, might have made Normandy a totally different outcome. That the Russians couldn't reinforce Normandy because Operation Bagration began on June 22nd while we were still struggling to get out of the beachhead and destroyed 28 German divisions, the destruction of Army Group Center. No German reinforcements were coming to Normandy because they were all being killed by the Russians on the east, on the Eastern Front. So, Trump just needs to know his history, and he humiliates the courage of the American service members. He humiliates us as a people every time he opens his mouth and says something stupid about World War II.
Yeah. So I think one of the things I just read, I was just checking out, and it said Zelensky talked to Erdogan and said, Crimea is a Ukrainian peninsula and we'll never recognize the regions, which is fine. The Russians already know. See, here's the thing about it. The Russians already understand what they're dealing with. This is, yes. Are the Russians good faith actors? Fair enough, they are. But they're also good, they're also playing chess. They understand there's a geopolitical game here. And to me, it's the UK saying, you got to start off with this because we got to start off by killing these negotiations. And the way to kill them is start off by saying, no way we'll ever accept Crimea or whatever, because we know that's a red line for the Russians and we got to go right to a red line. And again, I always say this, we're supposed to believe that Ukraine wants to bring back millions of Russian speakers, but their language is outlawed. Their church is outlawed. You know what I mean? Their history, and you're not allowed to read or teach or write in Russian. Everything about a Russian is outlawed. And we're supposed to believe that the Ukrainians are saying that the Ukrainians, yes, all of those Russian speaking people, we want to bring them back in. And this is a democracy, but they won't be allowed to vote because they'd all vote for Russian-speaking, pro-Russian people, and you'd have a pro-Russian government again. You know what I mean? So the whole thing is a fraud, which says that this has nothing to do with Ukraine. This is all MI6 trying to play the game, and they don't really have an end game because, oh yes, we'll keep this going until we can build an army to fight Russia. You're broke, and you're getting broker. You'll never build an army to fight Russia. Not in our lifetime, that's for sure. Scott.
Well, I have to wonder because, Zelensky's been playing on the fact that Turkey has said that Crimea is Ukrainian. That's the official position of the Turkish government. Zelensky just appointed as the ambassador to Turkey a Crimean Tatar, playing on that it's not just Ukrainian, but that Turkey has a vested interest in Crimea because of the Tatar population. But Starmer in the British government understand that Trump has said that Crimea is Russia, that the official U.S. position is, well, we can talk about the Novaya Russia and all that. Crimea, that's Russian. Rubio's there, Witkoff's there, even Kellogg's there. I don't think the British told Zelensky to say that. about Crimea. I think that's the kind of thing the British would have told Zelensky, shut up. Okay, you can bring that up later, but why start with a red line? Because you just potentially killed the negotiations. And no one's going to be talking about a Russian position or that. They're just going to say Zelensky couldn't keep his mouth shut. And before teams were able to meet, said something that, made the negotiations impossible. I think the British guy is supposed to tell Zelensky not to say that sort of thing, but maybe he hasn't arrived yet. Maybe he is still on his airplane flying in because it was just yesterday they announced it, I think, or even earlier this morning. That this guy was coming out to talk to Zelensky. Zelensky is out of control. He's an asset that's out of control. He has stopped playing a role. I mean, he's like a TV star, who was in this award-winning TV show, his number one greatest hits. Now he comes into season 2 and thinks that he is actually real and he's the star. And I have an idea on how I want this show to go, and the producer and the director and the screenwriters are going, no, that's not why we created this show, and that's not our vision for you. No, but I'm the star. I get to do this. Zelensky is off doing his own thing, writing his own script, and that'll be his downfall. Because the second a star starts writing his own script, just ask the guy who played he played a big role in The Godfather, the first Godfather. Clemenza, I think, was his, and he got too big, and they just killed him.
Yeah, exactly.
Godfather 2 starts, and Clemenza's dead. What happened to Clemenza? He died. Oh, that's too bad.
Last thing before we go, and that is the battlefield. I understand that there's Russians wandering around Chasiv Yar, that Chasiv Yar is fallen, soon to fall. The other side, the thing that the Russian has is the battlefield is leaning in their direction and will continue to lean in their direction. So they got time on their hands. What is the situation as you understand it on the battlefield, and all the talk of Russian offensives? Because the Russians, as you said before, the day where you line up a column of tanks and you attack another column of tanks, those days are gone. Things are different now. But what do you think of Chasiv Yar? What's going on there? The importance of that on the battlefield?
Well, it's not just Chasiv Yar. Pokrovsk. The Russians have entered Pokrovsk. These are all fortified towns. These are all logistical hubs. These are all the keys to a fortified line of defense behind which there is nothing. When these positions fall, and they're falling as we speak, there's nothing to stop the Russians. And what people aren't talking about is the fact that the Russians have been husbanding their forces. And there, I think, are 2 armies, which are corps-sized units, but we're talking up to 200,000 men, fully equipped, waiting to begin a breakthrough operation. Once the final defensive barriers are crossed, once they're beaten and the Ukrainians fall back on nothing, then you will unleash these 2 armies. And I think the Ukrainians can't stop until they get to the river. And they'll cross the river, and then Russia will consolidate. But the Russians have a plan, and it's a plan that's going to be implemented sooner rather than later. There's a reason why the Russians have said this is the last chance at a diplomatic solution. There will be no other chance. Once this happens, we're moving into the next phase. And I don't know if the next phase is going to transition from special military operation to war, but I think it might. I think the Russians might change the legal definitions, because Russia needs to this isn't just about defeating Ukraine, but Russia really needs to put a marker on the table for Europe as to what will and won't be allowed to happen. You can continue to send weaponry. If you send certain weaponry, no, that's, Taurus missiles, nah, no troops. If you send troops, but you can say no troops, but until you prove the point of no troops, that's what so I think you might see Russian attacks on critical infrastructure, for instance, railroads, bridges, roads, things that degrade the movement of troops into Ukraine, maybe even beginning to target the depth of the Ukrainian Air Force. Right now, the Ukrainian Air Force, again, it's something I don't understand, but I'm not a Russian military planner. They can fly freely over Western Ukraine. When they try to then migrate towards the battlefield. But, when you have Russian troops continue to be bombed by by the Ukrainian Air Force, in Scott Ritter's little world, that just shouldn't be happening. There shouldn't be a single Ukrainian plane flying, but it's a special military operation. And the Russians have created certain limitations, but I have a feeling that these limitations, these self-imposed limitations, are going to be lifted if the Ukrainians walk away from the negotiating table. I think we're going to be seeing a whole new level of intensity in the fighting, because the Russians can't afford to allow Ukraine to be re-equipped. Even if there's not a 30-day ceasefire, what we've seen in the past is the West is fully capable of generating funding, equipment, support, etc., to put up the next generation of the Ukrainian military. And this extends the fight. It's not. I mean, the Russians aren't going to lose the strategic advantage, but you may start getting stalemate in certain areas. Russia is as strong as it's going to get right now. In terms of the correlation of forces. After this, if the United States, for instance, what happens when Donald Trump says, "Now we're going to sanction and we're going to start sending money and equipment to Ukraine"? The Ukrainians start getting stronger. It doesn't mean they're going to win, but they get stronger. The problem becomes more tough. I think Russia understands now is the time. Either solve it diplomatically, or now at the moment of greatest Russian military advantage, you come in as hard as you can and you break the Ukrainians. Now's the time to break the Ukrainians. Either break them at the negotiating table or break them on the battlefield. But I just don't see this thing dragging out for 2 more years.
I agree. I think this is going to be a decisive summer. Could be wrong, but I think so. And I also think that, everybody always like, why won't the Russians blow the bridges, across the river? Because, that would stop the Ukrainians from being able to bring in supplies. Here's what I think. When it all gets said and done, and you got an open break to the river and you're closing on the river and the Ukrainians are retreating, that's when you blow the bridges. When you back them up against the river and you blow the bridges then and you obliterate that. You know what I mean? I mean, that's an old way of doing things. You back them up against the army, because what is the plan? The plan was never to blow up bridges. That's infrastructure. The plan is to obliterate the army. And if okay, if we let them sit around and reconstitute, we can't trust them, right? I mean, I hate to be cold-hearted, but this is just pure military strategy and the way the Russians work, right? The bridges, smidges, who cares? You get everything out on the battlefield, so you got an open run. They got nowhere to dig in, and they make a break for the river. And when they get to the river, there ain't no bridges across. And boom, in comes artillery. And just from the strategic perspective, you obliterate the army. And then you say to the West, okay, if you send troops in, they'll be awful lonely, because there ain't nothing left there. You leave them with nothing to fight with, nothing. I mean, I don't feel good about saying this, but from a strategic perspective, you obliterate the army, and that's kind of how the Russians work, Scott.
Let me put it this way. The night before Desert Storm kicked off and transitioned from Desert Shield to Desert Storm, they promulgated the campaign plan, the battle plan, the war plan. And I was in a position where I had the war plan put on my desk. And I remember flipping it open and reading the mission statement. And one of the key mission statements of our war plan was we identified the Iraqi Republican Guard as Saddam's center of gravity. And therefore, when you list all the things we wanted done, the destruction of the Republican Guard was our number one priority. The physical destruction of the Republican Guard. And so we fought an air campaign to isolate it, to weaken, etc. We did a ground campaign to outflank it. And we were in a position where, had the war continued for another 24 to 36 hours, we would have killed 30,000 Iraqi Republican Guardsmen, and we would have annihilated the Republican Guard, which was what our job was supposed to be. That's what we were supposed to do. It's war, baby. I'm sorry. You're on the wrong side of and then we stopped it, and we let 30,000 Iraqi Republican Guard live. And that's why Saddam Hussein continued to survive for another decade. Um, the Russians read history. Right now, they know what the center of gravity is. There's certain Ukrainian military formations that play a role in sustainment of the regime. One of those is the 3rd Azov Assault Brigade. There's others, territorial units that are based out of the West. These units must die. A denazification for some people can only happen with a bullet in the head. And so I agree with you. I think that when this campaign kicks off, the Russians are looking at the physical destruction of the Ukrainian army as one of their defining objectives of the military campaign, the physical destruction. Surrendering is nice, but you got to deal with prisoners at that point in time. I'm not saying the Russians are going to commit war crimes, but the best thing is to have such an overwhelming victory that you kill them all. And I'm sorry, Ukraine, you're going to lose 50 to 80,000 guys at this phase of the battle, because Russia is going to come rolling in and they're going to be maneuvering back with no place to hide. And Russia's not going to pause to take prisoners. It's not that they're going to shoot you when your hands are up. They're just not going to give you a chance to put your hands up. They're going to roll through you like a knife through butter and kill you all. And that's the way you win a war. That's how you win a war. You don't win a war by showing mercy. You win a war by killing the enemy, especially the enemy you identify as the center of gravity of that which you're trying to defeat. In the case of Ukraine, let's never forget that Zelensky is the figurehead of a Banderist regime, a Nazi regime, a Ukrainian nationalist regime founded in the ideology of Stepan Bandera. It's not going to survive this war, ladies and gentlemen. That regime is going to die. And to kill this regime, you have to kill that which sustains it, which happens to be about a hardcore 50 to 80,000 true believers that are currently, fighting the Russians in the East. And they all need to die. And I think Russia understands that.
Yeah, I certainly agree. And it is, the other part of it is, behind that regime is a Russia hating kind of reconstitute. Come on, when I look at von der Leyen, Kaja Kallas, and Mertz and these people are friggin' Nazis. They are carrying on the legacy of their grandparents and parents who were goose stepping around Berlin and Estonia or Latvia, wherever the hell, a couple of decades ago. And if they get the chance, they'll rebuild as many Ukrainians as they can get. They'd love to throw some of their people in. Let's go have another go at the Russians in 2 years, 5 years, 6 months, whatever we can. If you're the Russians, you say, you're going to have to do it with your own troops. You said, you built this Ukrainian mentality that says, yeah, we want to kill. And they said, we love to kill Russians. We want to kill Russians. Yay, the great thing. They got to sit there and watch Lindsey Graham. Yay, we get to kill Russians and we don't have to lose soldiers, right? All this, kill Russians. Let's give them this equipment and train them. What for? To kill Russians. You created this Russian killing machine. I can't let any part of that Russian killing machine survive. You created a Russian hating, Russian killing machine. If you're coming after me, you're going to have to create another one, because this one ain't coming back after me again. Not to mention this. If I push him up against the river, when I surrounded him in the battle of whatever it was, Sepulveda, whatever it was, you came and said, please let him go last time. In 2014, 2015, you said, please don't destroy them all. And I said, okay, we'll make a deal. And later on, you came back and said, gotcha. We just did that so we could get these guys ready to come back at you again. We've been down this road one time before. Last time I let them go. This time I got them all bunched up like a bunch of little roaches in a corner. Sad, sucks to be them. It is what it is. But these guys ain't coming back after me no more. Their equipment's going to be mangled. If anybody who survived is going to be so PSD and shell shocked that they'll be shivering in their sleep if somebody says the word Russian. So that's the only way I see out for the Russians. Yeah. And now you can't reconstitute this army. Ain't nothing to reconstitute.
Well, and I'll leave you with this thought. You remember that Russian negotiating team that so many people malign? One of the negotiators is the guy who closed the deal on Azovstal, the surrender of the Azov battalion in Mariupol. Mm-hmm. And he's there not only to remind the Ukrainians that they got their asses kicked in Mariupol, but he's there to look the Ukrainians in the eye and say, here's a signed agreement we have with you on the conditions under which we accepted the surrender. We didn't kill them all. And these are the things that you were supposed to do. If you remember, as part of this agreement, people were sent to Turkey, and they were supposed to stay in Turkey. But then you, Zelensky, went and cut a deal, and they left all that. You violated our agreement. You will never violate an agreement with Russia again. It will never happen. And this is why our new agreement has certain fail-safe mechanisms built into it. But you guys are liars, you're cheaters, you're thieves. And we know this. We have it on record. I personally negotiate with you. You shook my hand and signed a piece of paper. Your signature is useless. Your handshake is useless. You're useless. That's why the Ukrainians don't like this negotiating team. Another one of the negotiators is the guy who sat down with the Islamists in Syria. And got them out of Damascus and got them out of southern. He's the guy that sat down when they were surrounded and said, "Get on a bus, go up to Idlib, and we'll do." He can negotiate hard. This is a top-notch negotiating team, and the Ukrainians don't want to sit down opposite these guys, especially those Ukrainians that lied to the Russians in the past. The Russians are they're good people. Don't lie to them. Don't lie to them at all. Anyways, I'll leave you with that.
Yep. All right. Thanks a lot, everybody. Go to scottritter.com. You can find out about the Russia House at Scott Ritter's project. You can find about his Trump Watch project. And of course, you can get his new book. You can pre-order his new book, which is called
Highway to Hell.
Highway to Hell. All right. Thanks a lot, Scott. Thanks a lot, everybody. All right, Scott, I know you got to run. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Thanks.
All right. Bye. Bye. All right, everybody. Well, let's look and see. I think I saw Sparky. So, for God's sake, here I'm having a difficult time. There we go. We're going to look, and I think we have I think we got a few people. Wow, a whole bunch of people. So let's find the various comments. Let's start here. All right. Flying Bauer says Trump shaking hands with Jelani. What Scott thinks of that? Trump is in charge of the empire. Let me just say this. Don't forget, Trump's running the U.S. empire. The head chopping ISIS people right now, look what they're doing in Burkina Faso. They are tools of the U.S. empire, always have been. And so, I mean, this is a leader of one of the U.S. imperial tools. So, of course, Trump's going to shake hands with the U.S. and he's a head of the empire. Hey, we got a new member, Dave Shaw. Thanks a lot, everybody. You can see that little join button. You can click on that and you can become a member. All right, super chats. We're looking at super chats. I'm also going to check Rockfin. And I'm going to check for Rumble Rants in a few minutes so we can answer any super chats. Or who do we have? The Sparkster says, "Make Ukraine Russia again." There you go. Sparkster, don't leave a rump state called Ukraine, lest it remain a NATO playground, a carpetbagger's money laundry, and BlackRock property. You are correct about that, my friend. And I think the Russians knew the game. I think they know what they're up against. And I think they have a very, very unforgiving plan. Matthew says, will the USA and EU go into Ukraine? No, not happening. These European people, what they want to do is they want to send some small bands into Ukraine and to say, okay, excuse me, we want to send some small groups into Ukraine. We would love for the Russians to attack them. And we'd love to say to the U.S., okay, the Russians have attacked us. Now you got to fight the Russians. Under Trump, they ain't fighting them. It's not happening. Trump ain't going into Ukraine and fight. I don't believe that. I don't believe it. Jim, I guess, says they hate when the Qatar give money, but not AIPAC. That's a good point. That's funny, but I never thought about that. This whole business about the Qatar plane. Come on. First of all, come on. The Democrats and Republicans, they're like, oh my gosh, somebody from another country is giving things. I guess, that didn't count for Hunter Biden. Look, the bottom line is this. DC is corrupt. Inside the Beltway's bought and sold every last one of the politicians. why is this any different? It's just the reality. Let's not pretend like this is somehow something different. Oh man, somebody being bought and sold, receiving gifts from another country in DC. They hate when the Qatari give money. Oh, we already got that. Exactly. APAC literally says we're going to spend 100 million to get rid of this congressperson or get that congressperson in. Literally says we're going to corrupt the political system with money. They say that, and yet none of the people on Capitol Hill have a problem with it. Well, now the Qatar comes out and says, "Here, we're handing you a plate." Oh my God, you can't do that, really? But APAC can literally give us a list of the people that they're going to get out of office. Let's see what we got here. Do we have any no Rumble rants? And let's look at Rockfin, see if we've got anybody over at Rockfin who has something to say. Okay, we might have somebody at Rockfin. Nothing over at Rockfin. All right. Well, thank you very much. Well, thanks everybody. Certainly appreciate it. A couple of things. Number one, you see everything going across the bottom. Follow me on Rockfin. Follow me on Telegram. If you can afford it, become a patron. Patreon. If you can't, you got Buy Me a Coffee. That's always an option. It's buymeacoffee.com. It's like give Garland a coffee. How much? $5. However many you want. And of course, you can click on there to make it monthly. So that's an option. Cash App, all of the Cash App. Follow me on Substack. And of course, this is important now. I got my address out there. So there, it's right there, scrolling across, P.O. Box 32, Glen Burnie, Maryland, 21061. So if you want to send me a letter and, hey, Garland, hi, and I got a whole bunch of letters. I read every one of them. And they're like, hey, Garland, hi. I really like your work, or I hate your work, or maybe you could talk about that. If you just want to send me a letter, snail mail, there you go. If you want to send a book, I've had people send books. I've had people send magazines, recommendations, all kinds of stuff. So you can send me something at the P.O. Box. I'd love it. Donations. Some people say, hey, here's a few bucks. I hate to do stuff online. Whatever you want to do, you've got the P.O. Box. So feel free to contact me there. Sparky, let's see what Sparky popped up again. And Sparky says, I texted one of my brothers just a few days ago wondering if Burkina Faso would be invaded by the U.S. Army. People in Ivory Coast who flew from Niger, they sent Al-Qaeda instead. Yeah, well, that's what we do. The U.S. sends these doggone, uses these darn ISIS members to do their dirty work. So we will thank you very much, Sparky. I don't know what the hell I'm doing. Thanks a lot very much, Sparky. And everybody, the most important thing you can do is share this on all your social media platforms. Thanks a lot. I'm out.